You all know the man who invented Christmas. No, not Jesus. The other man who invented Christmas. It was Charles Dickens. Yes, the modern Christmas was essentially created by Charles Dickens through his book, A Christmas Carol. Prior to that, it was a minor holiday that was mainly overlooked as a religious holiday and a secular one. Today, we're going to look at how trauma shapes a person's life because you can see Charles Dickens' unresolved trauma in this movie, all his books, and his whole life. And this might help you to understand yourself and others. Hi, I'm Laura Giles, trauma therapist. Welcome to my channel. I talk about mental health in the movies. And if you find it helpful, please subscribe, comment, and share it with those who can benefit. And if you like the channel, maybe you would also like to have a conversation about movies and what you see in them rather than just listening to me talk about them. We've started doing this in my private group, and I'm finding it so inspiring. When other people share, there's lots more to discover. So if this sounds good to you, check out the link in the show notes. There is a free trial so you can see if it's for you with no obligation. Cool. All right. So the man who invented Christmas starts 6 weeks before Christmas. Dickens is an established author with huge hits underneath his belt, but his last three books have flopped. In fact, he's broke. Has a pregnant wife and a lot of kids, and he's renovating his house with really expensive fixtures. He's also supporting his parents, so that's another expense. So he is in dire need of money. And how does he get that? Well, he does readings, appearances, and he writes, but he only has appearances if he has something to read. So he has to write. So he decides to write a Christmas book. Now, that's a little strange choice because Christmas isn't the big deal that it is today. Like I said, it was a minor holiday and lots of businesses didn't even close. So, why he chose Christmas is anyone's guess. Maybe it was a marketing decision, like, what people do now. If you have a retail business, doesn't really matter what you're selling. A holiday is a good day to have a promotion. So maybe it was to gin up excitement in business. We don't know, but he chose to write a Christmas book. There are four main types of Christmas stories today: the Christmas miracle theme, the anti commercialism story, the dysfunctional family who really loves each other movie, and the unlovable grouch story. And the Dickens classic, A Christmas Carol, has a little bit of all of these. And The Man Who Invented Christmas isn't just about how the book came to be, it's about how unresolved childhood trauma can drive, distort, and define our adult lives. So I fact checked this movie, and all the main themes that you see are based in reality. Dickens' father was a gentleman who was not financially responsible. When Dickens was 12 in real life and 11 in the movie, the family's possessions were sold to pay off his father's debt, but it wasn't enough. So John Dickens was sent to the Marshalsea, which is a debtor's prison. Since his mom and siblings had nowhere else to go and no money, a couple months later they joined him there. And Charles acquired lodgings and lived alone and spent 10 hours a day in a rat infested, fume filled shoe polish factory with rotting floors. He was pasting labels on bottles. And he's 12. Could you imagine being 12 years old, alone, working 10 hours a day? He made 6 shillings a week, which is the equivalent of 63 cents. To give you an idea of how much that could buy, the average adult male made 2 shillings per day. And if you were skilled, you might make 3 to 5 shillings for a 10-hour day. So he was getting a lot less than an adult and expected not only to feed, clothe, and shelter himself, but he was the one responsible for keeping his family from starving as well. That dark period probably lasted around 3 months. Now, the movie doesn't show this, but his dad ended up getting out of debtor's prison when his mom died. So Dickens' grandmother. And she left him a little money, and he was able to pay the 40 pounds and 10 shillings that he owed to a baker. And after the family was free again, Dickens' mother wanted Charles to continue working there. Fortunately, this didn't happen, and he was able to return to school, but it was probably more likely because his father wanted to be perceived as a gentleman, and having a child who worked in a factory wasn't a good look. Probably wasn't out of love and care for his son. If you're familiar with Dickens' works, he often used real people as models for his characters, and his father was Mr. Skimpole from Bleak House. Skimpole was a well dressed man who sponged off the wealthy and soft hearted John Jarndyce. Skimpole is light-hearted, charming, and portrays this image as a bit of a simpleton, really. He doesn't understand things like money, obligations, and social norms, so he has an excuse to break boundaries. He can plead innocence when he gets caught. John Dickens is also the model for Mr. Micawber and David Copperfield. Mr. Micawber is a jovial, hopeful man who spends more than he makes. His motto is something will turn up, but it doesn't, and it doesn't save him from going into a debtor's prison too. And his wife is the model for Dickens' mother, and Mrs. Micawber is faithful to the end. She stands by her man and refuses to see any faults in him. So both Dickens' parents failed as parents. His father abandoned him and failed to provide and protect. Dickens became his protector and provider. His father was a source of lifelong shame. First, he tells Charles to remember that he's the son of a gentleman. Then, he doesn't give him the resources to back it up. It's setting him up to fail and to present himself as an imposter. And Dickens' life from then on becomes a carefully crafted stage act to make sure that people only see what he wants them to see. He can never admit to having worked in a shoe polish factory. That's just too humiliating. So Dickens carried a deep sense of worthlessness and shame. And this was really hard to keep up this act because in the movie, his father was going behind Dickens' back to get money from his publishers. He was going through Dickens' trash and selling his signature to people as autographs. This is not in the movie, but John Dickens would also hit his son's wealthy friends up for loans. And that's probably why Dickens bought his parents a house in Devon. But his father wouldn't stay there. So Dickens was also wounded by premature responsibility. So he was a parentified child. And we talked about that in the show that I did about Gilbert Grape. He not only had to financially support himself and take care of his own emotional needs at 12, he had to provide for the emotional and financial needs of his family. And that's too much for a person who hasn't grown into their own person yet. It robs them of the freedom to have experiences and make mistakes. We need room to grow, and Dickens never had that. All this created the foundation for Dickens' adult thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of ambition, control, perfectionism, and all that ended up being the coping mechanisms for a scared inner child who didn't have the safety and security to have more of a leisurely and balanced childhood. It also laid the foundation for his compassion, advocacy, and generosity. So trauma doesn't simply shape us into monsters, it gives us gifts too. As an adult, Dickens becomes a workaholic. We see him speaking in America, writing a book, dashing here and there. He's always on the move. He has set the bar to write a book in 6 weeks, which is unheard of, and he does it. It's done in time to get the illustrations done, get it bound, and in stores a week before Christmas. It's as if he's always running ahead of failure and financial ruin. As an adult, Dickens is also irritable and angry. He has moments of tenderness with his kids, his wife, and the young housekeeper, but for the most part, he's tense and irritable. He's short with his friend who's trying to help him. Whenever things don't go his way, in other words, when he's not in control, he's angry and reactive. We only see him cool when he's with his kids and when he's faking fine for the moneylender or other strangers. The kindness is an act, and I get it. If I was stressed about money all the time, had so many people depending on me, and felt threatened by failure and exposure, I'd be angry too. I'm not sure how else to feel in that situation. Dickens is also a people pleaser. This is another symptom of trauma. He puts on this act to gain approval that he didn't get as a child. It's like he's a trained monkey. I dazzle you, you applaud, everybody's happy. Except that there is no way to fill the bottomless pit of emptiness that comes from neglect. You have to reparent yourself and discover your self worth in a way that isn't tied to applause or performance, and Dickens hasn't done that. Dickens is also emotionally cut off. He has all these people around him, but he's not connected to any of them. It's like they exist in an orbit around him where they can be seen and heard, but it's like a hologram. It doesn't touch him. All these things are the way that he learned to survive. And of course, surviving isn't living or thriving. He's not dead, but he's kind of dead inside. He finds a way to succeed and makes money, but it's like a house of cards that threatens to tumble down with a blow of the wind because all that productivity and facade is built on anxiety and falsehoods. Now, I want to touch on the many scenes that show Dickens' creative process. Dickens is one of the most well researched people in history, so we know that he walked the streets of London at night while writing his book. He clocked an amazing 15 to 20 miles a night. And that was part of his creative process. And that makes sense because a way to solidify your thoughts that are swirling in your head is to walk. Engaging the right and left hemispheres of the brain by walking and acting of moving through space helps ideas to gel. We also see Dickens pacing around in his study, talking to himself, talking to his characters. We see Scrooge sassing and criticizing him. And Dickens actually did speak aloud to hear his characters' voices, and he actually did act out their movements. The way that it's portrayed in the movie, the viewers might think that he was a little crazy or dissociated or possessed, even. And I don't think that this is a reflection of trauma. I think that this is just part of his creative process that artists have. They do what they do to find that kernel of truth that they're looking for. Dickens brought stories to life through words, so he had to know what the characters looked like and what they would say and what they sounded like in any given situation. He was a student of life and would watch people. He really might pick up a line that someone said in a theater and put it into the mouth of one of his characters. But mostly, I think his characters were parts of himself, the wounded parts, the hopeful parts, the child parts, the hateful parts, even. Dickens has a perfect innocent character in every one of his stories. I think that child lived in constant conflict with his Scrooge like parts that were consumed with money, distrust, and cynicism. I think his creative process and the pacing was therapeutic, but not a symptom of the trauma. So Dickens is who he is. He's in debt and pressed for time to create a runaway bestseller when his dad shows up. He's the same clueless, cheerful, irresponsible sneak that he always was. He's still completely unrepentant and he's looking for money as always. And this triggers every insecurity within Dickens. And this is what happens when we escape our childhood wounds for a while, feel better and safer, and then it all comes back at Christmas. This is what a lot of Christmas movies are all about. We go right back into that early family pattern where we're the misfits, we're the ones who's made fun of, the hero, or whatever our role in the family was, and it just brings up all that childhood pain. Dickens is already up to his eyeballs in stress, and then all the buried resentment and humiliation returns. He feels like a powerless child again. So, what does he do? He does what all of us do. He goes right back into his survival patterns. Everyone does something different, but for him, it's about pushing people away and being irritable so they won't want closeness. He criticizes and becomes controlling. When we do the things we used to do, that doesn't help us to escape the patterns. They firmly entrench us back in the old dynamic, and this is exactly what happens. Dad is looking for Dickens to save him, and that's what Dickens does. John gives the kids a bird. They love it. They love him. So Dickens will look like a meanie if he denies them what they want. Then, of course, the bird gets lost in the house and causes all kind of carnage to the expensive chandelier. And that's how John rolls. He has good intentions, but isn't the least bit wise. He causes chaos wherever he goes and gets away with it and never has to change because he didn't mean it. So Dickens deals with all this stress by writing about it. His story becomes a Christmas carol. Scrooge is his adult self. Like Dickens, Scrooge was emotionally and physically abandoned by his father. He found safety from pain and money. But no matter how much he hoarded, there was never enough. Dickens spent his money. He gave lavishly to the poor, but he also spent lavishly, so there was never enough. Scrooge used coldness to armor himself against caring so that he wouldn't be hurt again. The Ghost of Christmas Past is basically Dickens revisiting his pre-traumatized self, his innocent self. If you want to heal the past, you have to revisit it. You have to feel the pain. The reason why trauma exists is because you didn't feel the pain and you weren't supported through it. In revisiting the past with the Ghost of Christmas Past, he has a chance to do that. The Ghost of Christmas Presents is Dickens being mindful. It's an act of radical acceptance. It's him saying, I've been emotionally detached. I'm lonely and disconnected in the presence of people. I can't relate to these people and they don't see me either. It's a come to Jesus moment of what his lifestyle has cost him. Dickens not only sees his estrangement from his family, he's taking ownership for his part in this. The Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come is potential. It's possibility. It's looking down the road and seeing where it goes. There's only one conclusion. It ends the same way it began, in isolation, pain, and coldness. But it also comes full circle because this is only a possibility. There is potential for a new start. And after moving through this experience, Scrooge decides to change. He's able to admit to himself that he wants connection, warmth, and family. He has to give something of himself. He has to risk. But he's able to now say that it's worth the risk. So his inner child meets his grouchy, withdrawn self, and they begin the process of integration. Dickens learns to have compassion for his wounded self and those who hurt him. He learns that control can coexist with vulnerability. And he begins to forgive his father, and since they're truly mirrors for each other, by extension, himself. Ta-da! Dickens has a hard time getting the book done. There's a time crunch for sure. It's not easy, but the manuscript gets finished. The 4 illustrations are done, and the bookbinder finishes the book, and it's on the shelves on December 19th. By Christmas Eve, all 6,000 books were sold, and Dickens is reconciled with his father, and all is well again. Not only that, but he sort of single-handedly reinvents Christmas. Like I said at the beginning, Christmas was a minor holiday that was growing in interest. And Dickens is responsible for solidifying that Christmas is a time for charity, giving, family, and feasting. He popularized the custom of wishing people Merry Christmas. He also popularized the custom of having turkey for dinner. Before that, it was goose or beef. So out of trauma came big change in the culture in the Western world. Before we leave the story of Dickens and how trauma shapes a person's life, I want to say that in the movie and A Christmas Carol, we have a happy ending. But it's really only a beginning. When Dickens and Scrooge are inspired to create change, that has to be followed up with consistent action. It's not enough to resolve to do something or to intellectually understand it. You have to release the energy that creates the pain. You have to do the healthy behaviors and have the healthy thoughts day after day. You need to check yourself to see if your plan is actually producing the desired result. And if not, switch it up. Dickens had this grand plan to have a blockbuster book, and he did, but it cost so much to produce because he wanted it to be lavish. It had gold edging on the pages and is bound in Moroccan leather. Dickens self-published this and wanted it to be affordable to the lower classes, so he priced it at only 5 shillings. And rather than the £1,000 he thought he would make, he only made 137. This is the way that trauma plays out. He yearns for beauty and grandeur to show the world that he's enough, while he's also pulled in the direction of compassion for the poor. Not a great combination. Dickens is his dad. He gets comfort from shopping. This was his lifelong pattern. Not only that, but he continued to write about money, poverty, injustice, social conditions, greed, and those types of things. His trauma continued to fuel his creativity to his last breath. So was it healed? I'd say no. I see a lot of people who carry a hurt or two. They do some work on it, they have a breakthrough, and then they say they're done. It's behind them. One of the most difficult things for anyone is to see themselves clearly. So I'm not saying they're lying to themselves. Maybe it appears true. But my suggestion as a therapist and a person who is growth oriented is to always be on the lookout for triggers and shadows. Not because you're never satisfied with who you are, but because it's a lot easier to move through life without baggage and hurt. Our traumas and painful experience can and do shape us, not only negatively, but positively too. Dickens was able to hold up a mirror to Victorian England and be a voice for reform for children and the poor because he was such a skilled writer. Everyone has a talent and a voice. We can all use it to improve the love, connection, and conditions for our favorite population, whether that's plant, animal, mineral, or human. So why not use our anger and discontent for that? And when you see someone who is very not self-aware or not very far along in their healing journey, why not remember that they were once an innocent child? And somewhere along the line, they learned that the world wasn't safe. How you see them responding It's how they have learned to stay safe. It's not about you. But showing compassion could be the thing that opens the door to their and your own healing. Dickens was a flawed man, for sure, but he leaves a giant legacy of love and hope during the Christmas season. It's a great time to heal. Thanks for joining me today. Have a Merry Christmas season.